You are dangerous, Mr. Kong, and I have worked too hard to build a life here to let anyone, especially a man like you, destroy it. She finally looked up, and her eyes were shining, but not with tears. With resolve. I'm not one of those women you're used to. I don't want your money. I don't want your power. I don't want your protection. I want to wake up every morning, go to work, save my money, and one day open my own shop. That's it. That's my whole dream. And it doesn't have room for a man who probably has enemies who would use me against him without thinking twice. Do-hyun sat very still. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever laid out the truth so plainly, so honestly, so without agenda. You're right, he said. About all of it. I am dangerous. I do have enemies. And being near me is a risk. He stood up and walked toward the counter. He stopped right in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to look at him. But I have never in my life met a woman who made me want to be worth the risk. Until you. Nyla's breath caught. He saw it. The slight parting of her lips, the way her fingers tightened on the cloth she was holding, the way her eyes searched his face for the lie she was expecting to find. She didn't find one. One dinner, he said. Not at some overpriced restaurant. Not in a private room with bodyguards. Wherever you want. However you want. Just one. She stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. There's a pojamika by the river, she said finally. It's cheap, it's loud, and they don't take reservations. Perfect. Tomorrow. 7 o'clock. And you're not sending a car. I'll meet you there. He nodded. And for the first time in years, Kang Do-hyun smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile he used in negotiations. A real one. Nyla looked away quickly, but not before he saw the flush creeping up her neck. The next evening, Do-hyun showed up at the pojamika wearing the most casual clothes he owned, which still probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Nyla was already there, sitting on a plastic stool, wearing jeans, a cream sweater, and small gold hoops in her ears. Her hair was down, a gorgeous crown of coils that framed her face like a painting. He sat down across from her and said, "You look beautiful. You look like you've never sat on a plastic stool in your life." "I haven't." She smiled, and it was the first full smile she'd ever given him. It hit him like a bullet to the chest. They ate tteokbokki and drank soju and talked for 3 hours. She told him about her mother, about growing up on the south side of Chicago, about the day she decided to leave everything behind and start over in a country where she didn't speak the language. She told him about the loneliness of it, the beauty of it, the days she wanted to quit and the mornings she woke up grateful she hadn't. He told her things he'd never told anyone. About his father, the previous syndicate boss, who had raised him with fists and silence. About the night he took over the organization at 24 after his father's assassination. About the weight of an empire he never asked for and the loneliness of a throne no one could share. "You could walk away," she said. "No, I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I walk away, the people who depend on me have no one. And the people who want to destroy me will have no opposition." He looked at her. "I'm not a good man, Nyla. But I'm trying to be a necessary one." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. It was the first time she'd touched him voluntarily, and the contact sent electricity through every nerve in his body. "I think you might be better than you believe you are," she said softly. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. Neither of them let go. He walked her home that night. Her neighborhood was rough, the kind of area his men would flag as a security concern, and it made something protective and furious rise in him like a tide. But he said nothing. He understood pride. At her door, she turned to him. "I had a good time." "So did I. This doesn't mean anything has changed. I still think this is a terrible idea." "I know. And I'm still not going to be one of your women. I don't have women. I have headaches disguised as women. You're the first real person I've been around in years. She looked at him, and something broke open in her expression. Something vulnerable and afraid and desperately hoping. He cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs traced the curve of her cheekbones. She closed her eyes, and a tear slipped down her cheek. I'm going to kiss you, he said. And if you don't want me to, say so now. She opened her eyes. You really should stop telling people what you're going to do before you do it. It ruins the element of surprise. He kissed her. It started soft, careful, like he was handling something precious and breakable. But then her hands fisted in the front of his jacket and she pulled him closer, and the kiss deepened into something raw and hungry and honest. He pressed her gently against the door, his body covering hers, one hand in her hair, the other gripping her waist like she might vanish if he let go. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. Terrible idea, she whispered against his lips. The worst, he agreed, and kissed her again. Now if you're feeling this story, if your heart is racing right now, I need you to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me your favorite part so far, and make sure you're subscribed because what's coming next is going to change everything. For 2 months, they existed in a bubble. Do-hyun would pick her up after her bakery shift, and they'd walk along the Han River or eat street food or sit in his car talking until the sun came up. He learned that she sang when she thought no one was listening, that she was afraid of thunderstorms, that she made the best sweet potato pie he'd ever tasted, and that she loved him with a quiet ferocity that made him feel like he was standing in sunlight for the first time in his life. She learned that he was ticklish on his left side, that he read poetry when he couldn't sleep, that his favorite color was the exact shade of brown of her eyes, and that beneath the armor of the most feared man in Seoul was a heart that had been starving for tenderness. He was careful. He kept her away from his world. She never went to his penthouse. She never met his men. He never discussed business in front of her. He was building a wall between her and everything dark in his life, and he was doing it brick by meticulous brick. But walls only work if no one is watching. And someone was always watching. Her name was Seo Yuna, and she was the woman Do-hyun had thrown out of his penthouse 3 months ago. The one with the recording device in her clutch. She came from a family that had once been powerful in the Seoul elite, but her father's gambling debts and her mother's scandals had reduced them to desperate social climbers clinging to the edges of high society with manicured fingernails. Yuna had been planted by the Yoon Syndicate, Do-hyun's chief rival, to get close to him. She had failed, and the Yoon boss, a cruel man named Yoon Tae-suk, did not tolerate failure. He had given her one chance to redeem herself. Find Kang Do-hyun's weakness. And now she had found it. She sat across from Yoon Tae-suk in his private office, sliding photographs across the desk. Do-hyun and Nyla at the Pojangmaka. Do-hyun and Nyla walking along the river. Do-hyun kissing Nyla at her door. A delivery woman, Yuna said, her voice dripping with disbelief and jealousy. He rejected me for a delivery woman. A foreigner. Yoon Tae-suk studied the photographs with the cold patience of a predator. She's not just a delivery woman. She's leverage. What do you want me to do? He looked up at her with dead eyes. Nothing yet. We wait. Let him fall deeper. The deeper he falls, the more it will break him when we pull her away. The first sign of danger came on a Tuesday. Nyla was finishing a delivery in the Songpa district when she noticed a black sedan following her. It stayed 3 car lengths behind, never too close, never too far. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself it was nothing. But she'd grown up on the south side of Chicago, and her instincts had kept her alive in places far more dangerous than Seoul. She called Do-hyun. Someone's following me. His voice went from warm to ice in half a second. Where are you? Songpa. Near the Olympic Park exit. Pull over at the nearest convenience store. Go inside. Stay in view of the cameras. I'm sending June. Do-hyun, maybe I'm overreacting. You're not. Do what I said. Now. June arrived in 7 minutes with 3 men. The black sedan was gone by then, but when June reviewed the convenience store's exterior cameras, he got a partial plate number. It came back registered to a shell company owned by the Yoon syndicate. Do-hyun destroyed his home office that night. He flipped the desk. He shattered the whiskey decanter against the wall. He put his fist through a framed painting worth more than most apartments. June stood in the doorway and waited for the storm to pass. They know about her, Do-hyun said, his voice ragged. They know. We can increase her security. Shadow teams. She won't even know they're there. She'll know. She notices everything. He pressed his palms against the window, his forehead touching the glass. I did this. I put a target on her by being selfish enough to want her. You could end it. Do-hyun closed his eyes. The thought of ending it, of never seeing her again, of going back to the cold, empty existence he'd lived before she walked into his lobby with her clipboard and her regulations, felt like swallowing poison. I won't give her up. Then we protect her. With everything we have. He told Nyla that night. He sat across from her in her tiny apartment, and he told her everything. Not just about the car following her, but about who he really was. Not the sanitized version she'd read about online. The real version. The blood. The violence. The bodies. The empire built on fear and power and things that would make most people run. She sat very still through all of it. She didn't cry. She didn't interrupt. She listened the way she did everything else, with her full attention and her complete presence. When he finished, the silence was suffocating. You should leave me, he said. Any sane person would. Probably, she said. I won't blame you. I know. Nyla. Shut up for a second. She stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city lights, her arms wrapped around herself. My mother used to say that love isn't about finding someone safe. It's about finding someone worth being brave for. She turned to face him. I'm scared, Do-hyun. I've been scared since the first time you smiled at me because I knew right then, that you were going to change my life in ways I couldn't control. And I hate not being in control. She walked back to him and stood between his knees, looking down at him. He looked up at her, and for the first time in his adult life, the most powerful man in Seoul looked completely vulnerable. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. He pulled her onto his lap and buried his face in her neck. She held him while his shoulders shook, and she said nothing because nothing needed to be said. That night, for the first time, she let him stay. They lay tangled together in her small bed, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her like he was shielding her from the entire world. He kissed the curve of her shoulder, the line of her neck, the soft space behind her ear. She turned in his arms and kissed him slowly, deeply, her hands exploring the planes of his chest, the ridges of scars she hadn't known were there. These, she whispered, tracing a long scar across his ribs. Old lessons from my father. She pressed her lips to the scar, and he exhaled a sound that was almost a sob. They made love slowly, reverently, with the kind of devastating tenderness that only exists between two people who understand exactly what they stand to lose. He whispered her name like a prayer. She held his face in her hands and watched his eyes the entire time, refusing to let him hide, refusing to let him retreat behind his walls. Afterward, he held her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat against her spine. I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone touch you, he said into the darkness. She laced her fingers through his. Don't burn the city. Just come home to me. But the Yoon syndicate was already moving. 3 weeks later, Nyla was leaving the bakery after closing when a van pulled up. 3 men jumped out. Mrs. Cho screamed from inside the shop. Nyla fought. She fought with everything she had, the survival instincts of a girl who'd grown up fighting, but there were 3 of them and they were trained, and the last thing she felt before the darkness took her was a needle sliding into her neck. She woke up in a cold room with concrete walls and a single fluorescent light. Her wrists were zip-tied. Her mouth was dry. Her head pounded from whatever they'd injected her with. Yoon Tae-suk sat across from her in a metal chair, his legs crossed, looking at her the way a scientist looks at a specimen. "So you're what Kang Do-hyun has been hiding," he said. "I must say, I'm disappointed. I expected someone more impressive." Nyla's heart was hammering, but her voice came out steady. "And I expected kidnappers to at least offer their victims a glass of water. We're both let down." Tae-suk's eyebrow twitched. "You have a mouth on you. I've been told." He leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to send your boyfriend a video. In that video, you're going to tell him to surrender his territories on the south side of the river. If he does, you go free. If he doesn't, he won't." Tae-suk paused. "Excuse me? He won't surrender his territories. Not for me. Not for anyone. You clearly don't know him at all if you think he will." She met Tae-suk's eyes with a steadiness that made the room feel smaller. "And honestly, I wouldn't want him to. Those territories protect people. Real people with real lives. I'm one person. I'm not worth more than all of them." Tae-suk stared at her for a long time. Then he laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "You actually believe that? How refreshing. How stupid." He stood up and nodded to the camera in the corner. "Make the video anyway. Let's see how noble Kang Do-hyun really is." Do-hyun received the video at 2:14 a.m. He watched it once. His face didn't change. His hands didn't shake. He set the phone down on his desk with the careful precision of a man who knows that if he allows himself to feel what he's feeling, he will become something that can never be undone. Then he looked at June and said 3 words. "Call everyone in." Within an hour, 47 men stood in the underground level of Kang Enterprises. These weren't corporate employees. These were the Shadow Army, the men and women who operated in the spaces between law and power, the ones whose loyalty was bought with blood and earned with years.